Okay, so we have a collection of ports which, particularly in Romania and Ukraine, are frankly sometimes considered a little bit to the side, not very important. My first argument in this presentation is that the ports considered together are in fact significant. So we have quite a lot of ports in Romania. We've got one port in the Republic of Moldova, and we have four, including two significant ports in Ukraine. This is one of the three ports in Galați in Romania. Dry bulk dominates the facilities on the Maritime Danube. There's one container service to Moldova, quite a small one, but there is one. Three reasonably large oil terminals on the Maritime Danube, and some smaller ones. Now the real crisis is traffic. Traffic has collapsed in recent years. Now look at Izmail, for example, from 6.6 million tons in 2010, close to the facility's capacity of about 8.5 million tons, right down to 2.9 million in 2012, last year. Galați in Romania has a similar figure. It's a port of a similar size with a similar traffic. To show this is not a problem unique to Ukraine, this is a problem throughout the Maritime Danube. But this is my first point. Together, the ports of the Maritime Danube, now going back to 2010, because as we've seen, the traffic has collapsed in the last 2 years, together, the ports of the Maritime Danube handled over 20 million tons in 2010. Compare that with Odessa's less than 25 million. So as I say, together these ports are important. I won't go through all these now, but there are lots of reasons why the Maritime Danube ports have such potential. And one example is investment which has already gone into ports in Romania and Moldova, including foreign investment. There's a variety of ownership regimes in the Maritime Danube. So the example in Moldova is a fully private port where the port authority is private. The normal state landlord and private operator, as we already have in Ukraine, as is going to be developed more in Ukraine with the port reform, and some fully state ports too. A variety of other systems have been tried. Interestingly, this is a port in Romania, another one of the ports in Galați. Two of the ports in Galați, which is a similar sized port to Izmail in total, are run by one company, which by Ukrainian standards would be called an oligarch. The man who owns the company was the former head of the KGB in Galați in the communist times. So one person controls these two significant ports, and overall the view has been positive in the last, say, 12 years that he's run those ports. The view has been positive. Why has there been such a crisis on the Maritime Danube? Obviously, there's been the economic crisis, but beyond that, the ports focus too much on certain clients. So, for example, the steel works in Serbia, which was handed back by its US owner to the Serbian government last year, that was virtually not working last year. It started again now. But that had a devastating effect on Izmail and Reni, for example. Other major facilities on the Danube have reduced capacity. Then in the Salina Channel, the Romanian access, you have very expensive cost for maritime vessels to get into the Maritime Danube. The Bistro Channel in Ukraine is a bit cheaper, but it's also got a lower draft. What's specifically happening in Ukraine? Well, there's quite a lot of accusations, but Mr. Zhivago's Ferexpo reduced a lot of work in Izmail after allegedly the rate in Izmail went from $4 per ton to $7 per ton of iron ore pellets. You've got the railway problem in Reni, with the port depending on Moldovan transit charges. And I note that the Ukrainian government have decided to cancel this Danube project, which was a project aimed at rejuvenating the Ukrainian Danube region. And it comes at a bad time, really. It doesn't show much faith in the region. The example of Reni shows just how bad the situation has got. The design capacity of the port is 14 million tons. It nearly reached it in the 80s, and last year it only handled 1 million tons. Is Reni. Clearly, I think it's widely accepted that port reform is urgently required. No need to dwell on that issue. I think the port law itself is viewed positively. It's arguably well written, compares well internationally, but how does it apply to those loss-making ports, for example on the Ukrainian Danube? It's highly sensitive in the local community of Izmail and Reni. In my presentations I like to have a balance. Some people say this, whereas other people say that. But from all the people I spoke with in Izmail and Reni, nobody is in favour of the port reform. I'm not saying that's for the right reasons, but sorry. The main concern, of course, is the employment impact. Now, here's some quotations from some people on the Ukrainian Danube. Let's go with this one. So, it's an employee of one of the ports, and he said to me, the port law is sound, the port law is good, and it's consistent with other countries, where it might work, but this is turned on its head when you consider the reality of life here. Now, I think he's alluding to issues of corruption, he's alluding to the fact that there will be a large employment impact. This is obviously the sensitive issue. Port reform anywhere in the world, the main issue is labour reform. I'll go to that in a second. One of the concerns too is there is no investor for the Ukrainian Danube. Who is actually going to invest there? You'll get companies to operate the facility, but are you going to get investment? You heard from Andre, it's difficult for a private port authority to actually make that investment. It needs to be from the stakeholders. The Deputy Minister, he believes there will be an investor found. He's reduced the tariffs in Izmail and Reni, and that's already brought an extra, say, 20,000 tonnes per month already. Obviously, much more than that is needed, but it's a start. Okay, I'll be very quick. So, yeah, port reform means labour reform in most countries, and that's the concern here. The government has said that not one worker will be lost because of port reform, but there's already dismissals are already underway in quite large numbers. And of course it's required, but it's a very sensitive issue. The government believes 10,000 jobs will be made by the new system. I'll very quickly mention how it compares globally. It's within the very ambiguous category of port privatisation. Of course, it's not privatisation in Ukraine, but it's difficult to look at other countries. Such a mess has been made of port privatisation globally, but it's difficult to look for a really good example. The UK, where I'm originally from, had a disastrous privatisation in the 1980s. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail later if you're interested. The optimum situation is I think that it's the private operator with the state having landlord control of the port estate, and basically that's what's going to happen here. The separating of the administrative and commercial operations has worked elsewhere. The example again being Romania on the maritime Danube. It's worked reasonably well there, even with oligarchs taking control of ports. So, reform is clearly urgently needed. On paper, the port reform is pretty good. It's well thought out. It could bring Ukraine in line with the global norm in port ownership. But there are so many questions that we can't really say how it will be. How will it be implemented? What will be the social cost? Probably high. Will it result in unfair monopolistic advantages to large Ukrainian groups? Maybe, but maybe that's not necessarily such a bad thing. We'll soon find out. Okay, thank you very much.